Last time, we explored the beginnings of Resident Evil Code Veronica's development, whereby the game began development on the Dreamcast as a means to give Sega fans who had been there since the Saturn version of Resident Evil 1 a new game. Starting out as a side entry that would follow Jill Valentine and Chris Redfield infiltrating Umbrella Europe for evidence to expose them, but with internal politics of wanting to rebrand Resident Evil 1.9/2.1 to Resident Evil 3, they wished for a more familiar protagonist for that game and decided to utilize Jill, leaving Code Veronica to need a new protagonist. Thus came the return of Resident Evil 2's heroine, Claire Redfield, in search of her brother who had gone on a solo mission to infiltrate Umbrella Europe, leading to a conversion of the story that saw a number of elements reworked and even toned down due to European perception. But eventually it had its first closed-door reveal at Sega's own event, whereby the media loved the short clip they saw of a high-quality looking Resident Evil game that looked along the lines of their previous FMV cutscenes, let alone in awe of the game being built in full 3D, as opposed to using pre-rendered backgrounds. And so with this newfound confidence, the team was now hard at work to build the game up drastically and evolve it for its first true public reveal at E3, building more areas in their more primitive states with wonkier lighting and other differences. However, with how tight development was getting, ideas started getting cut, with some even being reused later for a more robust re-release of the game on a platform that Capcom starts to have more faith in with its large install base. All the while pushing a massive marketing campaign that even involved 2,000 limited Dreamcast consoles themed to the game and a more charged Western ad campaign. As such, today in this final part, we shall explore the history and beta unused content of Resident Evil Code Veronica. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the subscribe button, hit the like button too, to further support us and keep creating new videos. As the team was aiming for their next reveal at E3 1999, the hype around the game was building, and from what people had seen, it truly looked like the next step in the right direction for the Resident Evil series. But the biggest question everyone had was, why did it not have a number? To answer that question, in late 1998, producer Shinji Mikami, together with general manager Yoshiki Okamoto, sat down with the Japanese Saturn fan magazine to explain their reasoning, whereby Shinji Mikami explains that, this time, there's no 3 or 4 in the title. Veronica is a person's name. The reason we didn't use 3 or 4 is because we wanted to make an all-new Resident Evil, including the visual aspects, etc. However, that doesn't mean this game will be a total Gaiden. It's a secret, but the story is a continuation of Resident Evil 3, isn't it? While vague on the story, Mikami and the team wanting to approach this a bit differently gave them reason to keep it separate from what is familiar to the series, considering the lack of pre-rendered backgrounds that were a staple, the over-the-top action, and even the storytelling being different being a reason, considering how important the Veronica name is, as Mikami states. But after a long wait, and much development done to further build the game, the May E3 1999 event rolled around, whereby Sega was revealing many of its upcoming games for its upcoming console, along with Sonic Adventure. Capcom's major focus was Resident Evil 3, with them wanting to release it by fall, but that didn't stop them from wanting to join Sega in presenting their fruits of their labor after that last short teaser. This time came a trailer that showed off a lot more of the game, not just the prison, but as well as the palace, training facility, and private residence. Basically, the entire first third of the game. And of course, in addition, Claire being seen in her iconic Resident Evil 2 outfit. In many ways, this was almost a re-reveal. While publications absolutely loved what they saw with the 3D environments, environmental impacts, and actual lighting cast by lamps, what they really wanted more than anything else was to feel the game, play it after so long. At this point, Sega announced that they anticipated the game would come out in December 1999, a few months after the Dreamcast's launch. Capcom had initially wanted a simul launch with it, but being the largest Resident Evil yet, had been delaying them. with the team getting a bit of extra time and already missing their initial release, the team was now under the gun to get the game done. But the development team still had many ideas that they wanted to include, but ultimately had to start cutting out due to time restraints. This including an extended ending. It was set to go beyond the final boss, this being a long cutscene of Wesker taking Claire hostage and Chris having to face him in a rather one-sided fight. A major setup for what was to eventually be concluded in a future entry that had to be removed for the time being. In addition, several of the game's inventory were being reworked, changed, and cut. Many of these being the game's inventory items. These include ammo, including the Coleco bullets, meant to be used with the M100P, the rifle bullets for the sniper rifle, and the M gun bullets for the submachine gun, none of which had a way to reload them in the final game, as well as an early version of the Magnum that looked a lot smaller. Aside from the weapons, several key items were cut too, potentially to simplify puzzles. These include the King and Queen ant reliefs, likely were to be combined with the red and blue jewels of the game. Meanwhile, some smaller changes were made, where the inventory item was removed, but still existed in the game in a different way. This would include the side pack, which was to be obtained as an item, but eventually just made to be automatically added to Claire's inventory for more space. There's also this portrait called Picture B, which was initially an item, but turned into a portrait you see on a wall in the model exhibition room. Possibly one was to move around the portraits originally, as well as a few miscellaneous items with no real place for them, including a red album, a map, a remote controller, a wire which defaults to the hemostatic and bottle when examined, Kresge's GNS, possibly for rooms that they wanted to make but didn't, and a square socket that has no model but only text of its importance. While development was going smoothly for these past few months, by September it was getting dangerously close to Code Veronica's release. And so in order to assist in releasing the game on a timely manner, Sega sent over some of its own developers to join the team to add the final touches, specifically in having it keep a good frame rate. And so just a month later, it was now time for the Tokyo Game Show once more. The big focus for the show was the Sony PlayStation 2 and all the crazy games that were coming to it. But that didn't stop Capcom from keeping the hype up for Code Veronica by finally having a proper playable demo. The team's hard work these past months finally made playable, taking place mainly in the training facility and the prison area that were seen in the trailers. What was finally of note was that the lighting was finalized, having that darker, moodier appearance that was missing just a few months back. But what was interesting is that despite the trailer showing Claire's old Resident Evil 2 outfit, the demo had a different costume, a new one entirely. While in many ways resembling the original pink pants version, but instead being blue, the vest looked more natural like the original Resident Evil 2 version, and less like armor like the pink pants version did. Meanwhile, sporting a logo resembling her old Made in Heaven logo from Resident Evil 2, but this time being Let Me Live, both of which being references to the band Queen. In many ways, the best of both worlds, Claire had been finalized. However, the game still had a lot of work, and it was here that Capcom announced that the game had to be delayed once more, now into early 2000. As this game was being made for their Sega Resident Evil fans, Capcom announced an updated port of Resident Evil 2 for the Dreamcast to be released on December 1999. This version would be a port of the PC version that had better resolution, a gallery view, a hard mode, and even let one use the Dreamcast's VMU to see the character's health. But the bigger icing on the cake was that the Japanese version, called Biohazard 2 Value Plus, would be packed with a demo of Code Veronica. The demo was very much like the Tokyo Game Show demo, featuring the final Claire model at that, even featuring a sound museum containing music from the first 3 entries. This being cut out by the final game. But upon beating it, one sees a new trailer for the game, where one can finally get a glimpse of Chris Redfield at long last, after years of teasing his inclusion in the game, down to even being playable and with a never before seen areas of the game. It was clear the game was getting close to completion. And that was exactly the case. The game officially completed development by mid-December 1999, with the game now penned for a February 3rd, 2000 release in Japan. With the release date announced, a pre-order window was made between December 22nd, 1999 and January 20th, 2000. If one pre-ordered the game, they would receive a limited edition of the game. This would come with a slipcase featuring the very new Let Me Live insignia that Claire carries on her back. That along with a bonus plaque of the Rockford prison from the game. But on top of that, Sega was preparing a very limited 1800 Dreamcasts, tinted red and packed in with a copy of Code Veronica's limited edition called the Dreamcast Claire Edition, while simultaneously making an even more rare limited edition console featuring a navy, almost black Dreamcast with the stars insignia right on it. This one only printed at 200 copies, and demand for these were extra high, to the point of Capcom running a contest for the opportunity to let fans purchase the console. While this was going on, marketing for the game continued as per usual in all regions. Commercials heavily emphasizing on the game's cutscenes and the quality of the game's graphics, while in addition, the Japanese version even featured an actor dressed as Albert Wesker advertising the game, albeit without the sunglasses, oddly enough. Meanwhile, America focused more on the horror aspect of it for their magazine ads. Certain particular ones featured a live-action Claire Redfield and a more sexually charged ad as per the era of ads at the time. But soon the game finally released as planned on February 3rd, 2000 in Japan, March 28, 2000 in North America, and May 26, 2000 in Europe. Capcom was hoping it would sell to a third of the Dreamcast's audience, which would mean at least 1 million people. It went on basically to sell just that, at 1.14 million units. A true success, in other words, to Capcom after 2 solid years of development. And it didn't stop there. Critically, it was a massive hit. Across the board, publications made it clear that it was an absolute must-own for the Dreamcast. A true killer app. Edge magazine finding it the closest the series has ever gotten to replicating a Hollywood action film, with much praise coming from IGN for its strong graphical fidelity and showing the power of the Dreamcast in full force. GameSpot loving the use of full 3D backgrounds as opposed to pre-rendered ones, with their ability to now allow for a proper dynamic camera. It did still receive a share of criticism, as this game came out after Resident Evil 3's release. GamePro was quick to point out how it doesn't feature the new abilities of Jill from that game, including her dodges and 180 backstep. But overall, the game was an instant classic, worthy of fitting with the previous entries, winning awards including GameSpot's Best Adventure Game of 2000. However, despite how well it did in all capacities, the Dreamcast was a dying machine, and Capcom knew that well. The numbers for the Dreamcast were just not good. It was climbing very slowly and was losing momentum. Capcom knew the series just wouldn't be able to survive if they keep it exclusive to this machine's small install base. And just before the ever-anticipated PlayStation 2's launch, where much of the Resident Evil fanbase was likely to go towards, Capcom announced on November 2000 that it would be releasing an updated port of Resident Evil Code Veronica on the PlayStation 2, titled now as Code Veronica Perfect Complete Edition, or simply as Code Veronica X in the West. Shinji Mikami commented that this version would include ideas that they couldn't put in the original game due to time constraints, specifically additional cutscenes, ones that would better expand upon the story of the game and the franchise as a whole, including the extended ending of Chris vs. Wesker that was cut from the original Code Veronica due to time constraints, being finally completed and added to this version. Otherwise, other smaller changes included overall graphical upgrades, and even the reworking of Steve's hair to have hair bangs, as well as reworking cutscenes such as Wesker vs. Alexia, whereby in the Dreamcast version, Wesker gets beaten quite easily, while on the PS2 version, however, he was to go full superhuman, whereby he ran on a wall before punching her. In fact, it can be pretty clear from these that they wanted to expand on Wesker as a character overall for the future of the franchise. So much so that the game's director, Hiroki Kato, wrote a documentary from Wesker's perspective called Wesker's Report, whereby he explains his whereabouts since the first game, a backstory of the series' events, and what he was planning. this being a hugely popular piece of media, as it would answer the questions many fans had at the time of the original Code Veronica's release of how Wesker even survived being impaled by the Tyrant in the first game. This was being offered by Capcom as a pre-order bonus. On top of that, Code Veronica X was to also include a demo for Capcom's other game, Devil May Cry, the very game that Hideki Kamiya had been working on as Resident Evil 4 originally, now being turned into an original game to be promoted with this updated port. While Code Veronica X was coming to the PlayStation 2, the Dreamcast was still set to get this updated version too, only in Japan, and soon both versions of Code Veronica X released. While much reception was similar to that of the Dreamcast's original release, reviewers such as IGN's main complaints were that it wasn't that different, while GameSpot's main complaint being that in that 18-month time span since the original release, Capcom's other game, Onimusha, had come out which had better controls and mechanics. Overall though, it was still loved for being Code Veronica, and the PS2 version went on to sell 1.4 million copies, outselling the Dreamcast version's 1.14 million. A decision that Capcom correctly had made in bringing the game over to a larger install base. Soon, this was followed by a port of the game to the GameCube, which itself received criticism for simply being a straight port. But this, of course, was part of a greater initiative by Shinji Mikami to bring the series to the GameCube exclusively, in a bid whereby not just Resident Evil 0 has shifted development from the N64 to the GameCube, but a restarted development of Resident Evil 4 was also in the works for it. While Code Veronica had an ever-changing development as the so-called side entry, it stands as being a title that is as important as any other numbered Resident Evil entry, to some even being even more important than Resident Evil 3 in terms of the plot progression of the series. Something even Shinji Mikami feels and believes should have been a numbered entry all along when he reflected on this many years later in a 2020 interview with YouTuber Archipel. On the other hand, Resident Evil Code Veronica, which isn't a numbered title, that game is a title that deserved more to be a numbered one. It didn't end up becoming one for political reasons between Capcom and the console manufacturing company. Personally, I wanted it to be a numbered title. Of course, many have an interpretation of this to mean that Code Veronica was all along supposed to be Resident Evil 3, but if you take into account Mikami's 1998 Sega fan interview where he mentioned that they purposefully kept it without a number for making a different kind of Resident Evil game, you can tell that the 2020 interview was more in reference to how he felt down the road. While the console manufacturer he mentions there could be more up for interpretation, many have theorized that this simply refers to the original deal between Capcom and Sega due to the failure of giving them that Resident Evil 2 port to instead deliver them a specific Resident Evil spin-off for their next generation console, which only made it harder to make it into a numbered entry originally anyways, especially with contracts in place and even receiving assistance from Sega themselves to finish up the game. But as the popular belief grew over the years that Code Veronica was in fact Resident Evil 3 all along before losing its numbered status due to not being on the PlayStation, has led to publications such as IGN parroting that over the years, which has led many to even incorrectly document it as a result. But of course, many don't know about the 1998 interview. What IGN has parroted is what has become popular amongst the masses. But whether to interpret Code Veronica as being the original true Resident Evil 3 may stay up for debate until one day Mikami or Capcom sit down and clearly explain it. But what matters more in the end is Code Veronica's grand importance to the series, so much so that it directly leads into the story of Resident Evil 5, and as a result, this entry's popularity persists to date. From HD ports of the game on the Xbox 360 and PS3, and as of this video, much fan outcry ringing for a remake of this beloved game in the veins of Resident Evil 2 Remake, following where Claire Redfield left off in that remake. And thank you for watching! Hit the subscribe button for more Resident Evil and other games gaming history and cut content soon. Hit the like button and comment below on if you would have gotten one of the limited edition Code Veronica Dreamcast consoles. So everyone, thank you for watching!